It's July 12th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the NATO summit in Lithuania. South Korea and NATO upgraded their partnership and cooperation in 11 areas. NATO member states have also called on North Korea's complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. And today, President Yoon will sit down for a bilateral with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, with talks on the Fukushima wastewater release expected to be included in the agenda items. Torrential downpours have inundated many parts of South Korea, leaving one person dead. Rain-related emergency disaster text alerts were issued for the first time. The NATO has condemned North Korea's nuclear and missile programs as President Yoon pushes for greater global resolve against Pyongyang's illegal actions. This as he also adopted upgraded relations with the military alliance. Our top office correspondent Oh Soo-young has more from Vilnius.
South Korea has upgraded its bilateral partnership with the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance, whilst jointly addressing common issues spanning North Korea's nuclear threat, building peace in Ukraine, and new technologies. On Tuesday, President Yoon and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg adopted an individually tailored partnership program for South Korea and NATO, highlighting 11 areas of cooperation. These include 7 specific areas, including non-proliferation, counter-terrorism, cybersecurity, and emerging technologies, with 4 areas of implementation, including working and high-level dialogue, capacity building and interoperability, and public diplomacy.
이번 나토 참석은 나토와 한국 간의 협력의 틀을 제도화하고 나토와 군사 정보와 사이버 분야의 협력에 관한 논의를 진행하기 위해서 이번에 왔습니다.
In particular, the President emphasized intel sharing and cyber cooperation, sharing his plans to establish an international cyber training center in Korea, which he hopes will work closely with NATO's Cyber Defense Cooperation Center.
This is because the battlefield is not limited to a specific territory and geographical scope, and many illegal acts and violence have been committed online, transcending time and space, and psychological cyber warfare has developed to sway public opinion. Thus, in all areas of security, from installing cutting-edge technologies to intelligence, strengthening intel and cyber cooperation is all the more vital.
Yoon also called for a firm global response to North Korea's growing nuclear and missile provocations, to which Stoltenberg voiced his support. The South Korean leader also reaffirmed Seoul's unwavering support for peace and reconstruction in Ukraine. He's expected to further highlight these issues Wednesday with his counterparts from other invited Asia-Pacific countries, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand.
President Yoon will moderate the meeting of the so-called AP4 nations as they look to increase and deepen cooperation across the Indo-Pacific and Atlantic regions based on their growing areas of overlapping interests and challenges.
Following the meeting, the South Korean leader is set to speak at a NATO session extended to partner countries. The 31-member alliance on Tuesday called for the complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization of North Korea in a joint communiqué condemning in the strongest terms North Korea's weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile programs. It also urged the Pyongyang regime to return to international agreements on nuclear non-proliferation as well as dialogue proposed by Seoul, Tokyo and Washington. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Vilnius.
President Yoon also held separate meetings with the leaders of NATO members and allies with a broader aim of deepening Seoul's cooperation with them. Lee Kyung-eun has the details.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has sought to use the NATO summit in Vilnius as a path to expand South Korea's diplomacy in Europe through a series of meetings with the leaders of several NATO members and allies. Those include a meeting with Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, where the leaders discussed cooperation on renewable energy, defense, and research in the Arctic region. And in his meeting with Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, a third time to do so, they discussed stabilizing the global semiconductor supply chain and cooperation on artificial intelligence. The digital sector also topped the agenda in Yoon's talks with Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Costa. While the meeting with New Zealand's Prime Minister focused on the mutual supply chain, discussions with Hungary's Prime Minister were on electric vehicles and the bio sector. Yoon discussed nuclear cooperation and the defense industry with Romania, and talks with Sweden's Prime Minister were on building key supply chains such as batteries and rare earths. While each meeting was focused on a particular area of interest with the respective nation, the South Korean leader had a broader aim to expand Seoul's partnership with Eastern Europe as a whole, which the presidential office deems critical to national security.
Until now, Yoon's summit-level diplomacy was focused on Western Europe and America. But this NATO trip serves as a chance for South Korea to expand global supply chain cooperation with Eastern Europe. The region could play a strategic role in complementing Western Europe on economic security, with its basic science capability and potential.
President Yoon also used each meeting as a platform to promote South Korea's bid to host the 2030 World Expo, as well as showing Seoul's solidarity in supporting Ukraine and calling for cooperation on North Korea. The president will continue meeting other leaders on Wednesday, including those from Japan, the UK, and Finland, which will bring his combined bilateral summits from his NATO trip to 13. Young-eun, Arirang News.
South Korea and NATO have upgraded their partnership, expanding their cooperation in 11 areas with an agreement called the Individually Tailored Partnership Program, or ITPP. For more, we're joined by Professor Min Jang-hoon this morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. My pleasure.
South Korea adopted an individually tailored partnership program with NATO, focusing on 11 areas, namely non-proliferation, cybersecurity, and emerging technologies. Now, why is it important that the country has upgraded its relations with the NATO?
Yes, as you mentioned, South Korea and NATO established the bilateral partnership for cooperation in 11 areas like anti-terrorism, non-proliferation, emerging technologies, and cyber defense. And they adopted the ITPP during the summit meeting. And under the ITPP, the two leaders agreed to hold regular working level and senior level talks on political and military affairs. And it also encourages South Korea to participate in NATO discussions on emerging technologies and cyber defense. And the partnership also called for establishing a consultation body to strengthen anti-terrorism capabilities between the two sides, and also asked for South Korea's participation in NATO's anti-terrorism exercises and working group. And they also discussed North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. And President Yoon emphasized that the international community must send a strong message in response to North Korea's nuclear and missile provocations, and asked for NATO's continued support. And the NATO's chief reaffirmed the position that he supports the South Korean government's efforts for North Korea's complete denuclearization and sustainable peace on the Korean Peninsula. So
Sure.
in sum, South Korea has upgraded its relations with the NATO through this summit, and such enhanced cooperation will be beneficial for both sides.
Right, you just mentioned North Korea issues topping the agenda were no surprise, but they did adopt a joint statement on North Korea's complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, known as CVID. Now, why do you think they felt the need to raise North Korea issues at the summit, and why CVID?
Basically, I think the summit mainly deals with the security matters, and its scope is not limited to the European continent. They raised the North Korean issues at the summit because they recognize that North Korean issues are a serious security threat that could affect their own security and the international community as a whole. And the European countries have been supporting the CVID for North Korea's denuclearization. They are mainly concerned about the possibility that North Korean nuclear weapons and capabilities could be spread out to the rogue nations and terrorist groups that could affect or threat their own security. So they don't want to see a situation where North Korea has nuclear weapons and it is considered as a nuclear weapon state. So it means that NATO member states basically support non-proliferation for their own security, and it is applied to North Korea's denuclearization.
Right. NATO members are also seeing North Korea issues not just as a regional threat to the Korean Peninsula, but as a global threat as a whole that can be seen as further provocations in missiles or nuclear programs, right?
Right. Yes, and they recognize the North Korean nuclear threats as a global the security threat. And as I mentioned earlier today, the North Korea's potential export the nuclear weapons to the rogue nations and terrorist groups to the European countries and in the European continent. So they basically support the proliferation for any countries of potential nuclear weapon, the state or something like that.
Sure. President Yoon also kept himself busy with separate bilateral talks with multiple leaders from around the world, including Norway, Portugal, New Zealand, Hungary, Romania, you name it. But which of the meetings do you think, Professor Min, are particularly meaningful or significant? Why?
Basically, it is known that the President Yoon is supposed to have over 10 bilateral meetings with the NATO member states, including Norway, Portugal, Netherlands, and he also moderates the AP4 summit meeting during the NATO summit period. And I basically think that all meetings are meaningful and important, but in particular, I'm paying much attention to enhancing cooperation in technological fields with the NATO member states. Again, South Korea and the NATO member states share their interest in advanced technologies and high-tech industries. They are interested in enhancing their cooperation in these fields, and such cooperation will contribute to securing their future growth engine. For example, in the summit meeting between South Korea and Netherlands, the two leaders evaluated that the two countries have improved their cooperation on military security, artificial intelligence, semiconductor, and nuclear energy. They also agreed to enhance their cooperation on semiconductor industry in order to secure the stable global supply chain. So it is meaningful and important that South Korea improves its cooperation with the NATO member states in the high-tech industries, and their cooperation is likely to be improved in the coming years as reliable partners based on the universal values they share in common.
Before we let you go, Professor Min, it's President Yoon's second attendance at a NATO summit. What does a second invitation say about South Korea's standing in the world?
Well, regarding President Yoon's second attendance to the NATO summit this time, the presidential office announced last week that President Yoon would meet the NATO leaders and they would talk about the Ukraine war, cooperation between the military alliance and in the Indo-Pacific and the emerging security threats. So, and in addition, the presidential office also mentioned that this visit will achieve three results: strengthening international security cooperation, expanding supply chain cooperation, and promoting South Korea's bid to host the 2030 World Expo in Busan. So we can see that South Korea would discuss with the NATO member states about important international matters like the Ukraine war, security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, and the supply chain cooperation. And along with South Korea, other major Asia-Pacific partners like Japan, Australia, and New Zealand were also invited to the summit. So it shows that the major democratic allies and partners around the world participate in this summit and discuss about how they would enhance their cooperation in order to cope with the major international matters. So overall, South Korea's attendance to the NATO summit for 2 years in a row suggests that South Korea has been recognized as an important partner that European countries want to work together for their own interest and the major international issues.
Indeed. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Professor Min. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
And today, President Yoon will meet with Japanese Prime Minister Kishida in a separate bilateral meeting on the sidelines of the NATO summit. That's according to an official from President's office speaking to reporters in Vilnius on Tuesday. The senior aide said that a specific agenda had not been decided, but the two sides are likely to discuss Japan's plan to release Fukushima wastewater into the sea, which has been met with a strong opposition by Japanese fishermen, environmental activists, and countries in the region. The official also said the meeting could be seen as a resumption of top-level diplomatic exchanges, with the two leaders also discussing how to address exchange rate volatility, supply chain instability, and promoting research in cutting-edge tech. Staying in Lithuania, NATO leaders on Tuesday agreed to offer Ukraine an invitation to join their military alliance, but with no details on the timeline yet. Lee Seung-jae has more.
NATO leaders in the Lithuanian capital on Tuesday offered an invitation to Ukraine to join the military alliance, but remained vague on further details, including any time frame.
We reaffirmed that Ukraine will become a member of NATO and agreed to remove the requirement for a membership action plan. We also made clear that we will issue an invitation for Ukraine to join NATO when allies agree and conditions are met.
In the communiqué on Tuesday, NATO did recognize the need to move faster, but would not be drawn on a timeline for when Ukraine would be invited to the alliance, as the leaders struggled to agree on when Ukraine might join, as well as other conditions of its membership. NATO members did, however, acknowledge that Ukraine's military was increasingly interoperable and more politically integrated with NATO forces, adding it would continue to support Ukraine's push for democracy and security. NATO's lack of clarity over offering Ukraine membership into the military alliance led President Vladimir Zelensky to criticize the latest statement. Taken to Twitter on Tuesday, the Ukrainian leader said that while the country values its allies, Ukraine also deserves respect, adding that it's unprecedented and absurd when a time frame is not set neither for the invitation nor for Ukraine's membership. Zelensky also slammed the delay, saying there seems to be no readiness to invite Ukraine, adding that a window of opportunity is being left to bargain Ukraine's membership in NATO in negotiations with Russia, meaning it will give Russia the motivation to continue its terror. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Washington says Pyongyang's claim that U.S. aircraft violated its airspace is unfounded, while also calling on the North to stop its escalatory actions. According to a U.S. State Department spokesperson on Tuesday, the regime's recent allegations are unfounded, as high seas freedoms of navigation and overflight apply in areas where the spy planes flew. The statement comes as the U.S. Department of Defense also dismissed the regime's accusation as groundless. North Korean leader Sister Kim Yo-jong earlier this week accused the U.S. of flying spy aircraft, which intruded into the North's exclusive economic zone on multiple occasions. She also threatened to shoot down such aircraft in the future. Torrential rain swept South Korea on Tuesday, claiming at least one life. The capital area is expected to experience a lull in the rain today, while southern regions will see more downpours. Our Lee Soo-jin reports.
One person has died after heavy downpours swept across South Korea on Tuesday. In Yeoju, Gyeonggi-do province, about 60 kilometers from Seoul, a man in his 70s who was walking along a river was killed after being swept away. Police and firefighters launched a search after his daughter reported that he had gone out to exercise and not returned. His body was found in the bushes near a river after a 3-hour search. At the time, Yeoju was seeing up to 60 millimeters of rain per hour. In Busan, 2 women in their 60s were stranded at around 3:40 p.m. as the water level of a local river rose during the heavy downpour. Although one was rescued, the other is still missing and the police are still searching for her. Seoul also had heavy downpours on Tuesday, with Dongjakgu district getting more than 100 millimeters of rain in a single day. Emergency alerts were issued to several areas in Seoul, including the districts of Dongjakgu, Gurugu, and Yeongdeungpo-gu. The Korean Meteorological Administration implemented a new measure on June 15th to directly send emergency alerts to regions experiencing intense downpours, which are classified as more than 50 millimeters of rain in 1 hour and 90 millimeters of rain in 3 hours. The heavy rain also disrupted the operation of subways in Seoul. Subways in the metropolitan region have to halt services when there is more than 65 millimeters of rain per hour. Trains on Line 1 were temporarily halted but resumed within 10 minutes. Trains on Line 4 were suspended for 2 hours. As of 11:30 p.m. on Tuesday, heavy rain warnings for Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province were all lifted. The KMA forecast today to be mostly cloudy with a lull in the rain in the Seoul metropolitan region. Southern parts of the nation, however, are expected to see heavy rainfall of 30 to 60 millimeters per hour, accompanied by strong winds, thunder, and lightning in the afternoon. Heavy rain across the nation is also being forecast until this weekend. 이수진, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in the US state of Vermont, where one person has died in major floods. More than 100 people had to be rescued. Now, the state and other parts of the Northeast were hit by a massive storm over the weekend that dumped up to 2 months of rain in just 2 days. The floods washed out roads, damaged houses, and caused billions of dollars of damage. Now, flood watches were issued to millions of people in the region, but these were lifted on Tuesday evening. Still, local authorities remain on alert as dams are near capacity in Vermont and many rivers remain swollen. Now, the state is forecast to see more rain on Thursday and Friday. We move over to Thailand now, where Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha is set to retire from politics. The announcement was made Tuesday, 2 days before the country's parliament was scheduled to vote for a new prime minister. A general election in May saw opposition parties win overwhelmingly in what was widely seen as a rejection of military-backed rule. The outgoing PM was not expected to gain enough support in the lower house to win another term. His government has been criticized for repression of civil rights and freedoms and for its handling of the coronavirus pandemic and the economy. The retired general began his rule over the country in 2014 after seizing power in a military coup. He was later formally elected in 2019. He will remain as prime minister until a new government is formed. Now, 2 siblings have become the youngest ever winners of the prestigious Zagreb Trophy after both set records for flying solo around the world. The dual British and Belgian citizens, Zara and Mac Rutherford, aged 18 and 21, picked up the award on Tuesday. Mac became the youngest person to fly unaccompanied around the world in 2022 at the age of 17. And 8 months earlier, Zara became the youngest female pilot to accomplish the feat, aged 19. The trophy goes all the way back to 1930 and is awarded by the Royal Automobile Club to those who demonstrate skill and courage in transportation on land, water, or in the air. Previous winners include Lewis Hamilton and Richard Branson.
Good morning. Hope those in central regions stayed safe during Tuesday's downpours. And today, it's southern regions that are seeing heavy rain from early dawn. Rain is coming down hard with heavy rain alerts in place in south coast regions. And until this afternoon, the south will see 30 to 60 millimeters an hour of heavy rain. And until tonight, 전라남도 and 경상남도 provinces could see more than 100 millimeters of rainfall. A landslide crisis alert is at the second highest level in Korea, except on Jeju, where a heat wave warning has been issued in parts of the island. brace for strong heat. Morning temperatures have already soared to 30 degrees Celsius. The capital region will be free from rain today under partly sunny skies, with highs topping out at 30 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow, wet and stormy conditions return to central areas. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions. We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. Stay safe wherever you are.